Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky. Today I'm taking a look at the author Muriel Spark. She lived from 1918 to 2006, wrote 20 novels, a whole bunch of short stories and poetry and critical essays. And she doesn't seem to be an author that we talk about a whole lot these days. Maybe just not in my circles. But she's an author whose work I've always enjoyed. And I wanted to talk to you about why I think we should all continue to read and reread Muriel Spark. I was thinking about this because I recently picked up this collection of Muriel Spark, collection of 4 of her novels, novellas: The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, The Girls of Slender Means, The Driver's Seat, and The Only Problem. And I read just recently Girls of Slender Means, so that's what I'm going to be relying on most. I've also read The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie and Loitering with Intent. She was nominated for the Booker Prize a number of times. She was shortlisted 3 times for the Booker, never won a Booker Prize. She wrote from the 1950s all the way up through, I think her last book was published in 2004. She passed away in 2006. She lived all over the world. She was born in Edinburgh. She lived in London, in New York City, and finally in Tuscany, in Italy, which is where she passed away. So she was living in a lot of different places and writing about a lot of different places. She has a way of writing, a way that's satirical, sometimes almost a parody. And I really like that. There is humor, but it is not, for the most part, laugh out loud funny. It makes you smile. It makes your brain smile. It also makes you go, I hadn't thought about things that way. Muriel Spark tends to focus on women characters, sometimes ensemble casts. That's what we have in the Girls of Slender Means. We have an ensemble of young women, a lot of them in their early 20s, who have gone to London during the war because that's where the jobs are. So this takes place in a very short period of time in 1945. So it starts after the Germans surrendered. We have VE Day, Victory over Europe, and ends about the time of the Victory over Japan, VJ Day. So right at the end of World War II, there are rations galore, and a lot of people just trying to figure out, how do I live in a post-war London? The women in this book are staying at a boarding house called the May of Teck. It's T-E-C-K, as in the wife of George V, Queen Mary of Teck. So the mother of Edward VII and George VI, the grandmother of Elizabeth II, so on and so forth. But this boarding house is set up for single women, most of them young. There are a few older spinsters who play a role in this book, and it just makes for a great ensemble altogether. It is told mostly from the viewpoint of Jane Wright, who is a publisher's assistant and gets a chance to work with a number of unknown authors who are writing poetry and experimental fiction, and the publisher is looking for the next breakout star, and he's usually publishing people who have been rejected multiple times. So Jane's a fascinating character. The title, Girls of Slender Means, is really about the physique of these women. For one thing, they were not getting nearly enough calories because of rationing. You only got so much butter, so much margarine. Protein was really hard to find. You got an egg a week. Tea was rationed. Everything was rationed. Everything was rationed. And so most of these women were quite small anyway, and then they also tended to really lean into that. And she is also the intellectual of the house. She's always talking about doing brain work. And it's framed from 1963, which is the year that this book was published, framed by the death of Nicholas Farrington. Jane receives the call, and we see her at the beginning of many of the chapters calling someone else from the old May of Teck Club. And then it goes back to 1945 to continue telling the story. Some of these girls are actively dating. Some of them are actively seeking a husband. Some of them just enjoying themselves, but all of them single and away from home with various skills involved. But we do get to see how these women are taking charge of their own lives. Jane, we see a lot more because we see a lot more of her interaction with her publisher. We see her interaction with the writers, including Nicholas. Nicholas was one of the poets, novelists who Jane was working with. Jane also worked on the side for an autograph collector, among other things, named Rudy. So she would forge letters to various celebrity authors for the most part. For example, Ernest Hemingway. But to actually have something that author would read and then respond with a signed letter so that Rudy could get an actual signature from an actual famous author. The Girls of Slender Means, a double meaning, one meaning actual physical size because of the time of rationing and the lack of calories. And then there were also coupons for clothing and things, so the many of the girls shared clothes. Jane was larger than most of the rest, and so she didn't get to share with them. And so she's kind of set apart in a number of ways. She's also not seeking love or marriage or anything else. She really wants to be a writer, a publisher, and a journalist, and she's really focused on that career. That's a big part of what Muriel Spark does, is show us how these women, even at young ages, are acting on their own agency, making their own lives, not being driven by men in their lives, whether that's a boyfriend or a husband or a father. They're not paying attention to any of those models. They are driving themselves forward into what they want. Girls of Slender Means also refers to the fact that none of them had much money at all. Most of them were working, they could afford the board, they had the ration coupons to be able to purchase things, but none of them were from rich families. So they had slender means in more than one way. So these women each have their own direction that they're moving. One of the older spinsters, her name is Greggy, and the gardens are hers. She's the one who tends the gardens. She talks about where a bomb fell during the bombing campaign by the Germans of London, and talks about how the bomb squad came out and removed the bomb, and talks about her theory that there's another bomb somewhere, that she's pretty sure she saw another one fall. And she gives the tours of the house and the tours of the grounds to visitors and to new boarders. This is a tall house. I'm thinking it's 5 stories, a ground floor plus 4 more. There's a fire escape on the top floor. There's also an old skylight that has been bricked over because there was, at some point, sometime, there was a man who would sneak in through the skylight. And so it was boarded up. There's also a small opening of a window that leads out onto the roof of the building. The house has been separated from larger rooms into smaller rooms so that more women can stay there with smaller amounts of space. And in the bathroom, there is a window that has been covered mostly by a wall, but there's a small opening, and so many of these slender girls can squeeze through. And a lot of times they get some help from coating their bodies with margarine. We learn about a woman who teaches elocution. So she often has students either in the main sitting room downstairs or up in her room and practicing poetry. She does mostly readings when she's working with these other women. She does a lot of readings from the Bible and from the Book of Common Prayer, and a little bit of poetry. She is the daughter of a country vicar, but she is working on her elocution and teaching other women how to lose their regional accents. So someone who comes from the Midlands and speaks with a Midlands accent, and she helps them speak much more standard London, the King's English, maybe you would say, I don't know. We learn about Selena, who is constantly looking for male companionship. She has her eye out for a husband, but the men that she's dating now in her younger days are not the kind of men she would want to marry. But she is dating quite a few of them and having a good time. There is another young girl who's having an affair with an American Air Force officer who is married, whose wife lives in California. But Nicholas comes in, and he attaches himself primarily to Jane because of her connections with the publishing industry. But he also, I'm going to say, he falls in love with almost every woman in the house. He also apparently has some male lovers also. He is a radical poet, an anarchist. He writes a novel that is almost incomprehensible, but he writes it in a way that people think he's brilliant. Something that he decides not to publish with Jane and her publisher. He gives the manuscript to Rudy. Anyway, none of the women in the house let Nicholas control them in any way, nor does even the men who have some authority over these women, Jane's boss, the publisher, or Rudy, who she works for on the side, the elocution teacher whose father is a vicar. They may refer to these fathers and boyfriends and male companions, but they are completely independent, and they are doing what they want to do. They are living the lives they want to live, not caring about the opinions of any men around them, often not caring about the opinions of the women around them, except just staying at a good friendship level so that they can continue to borrow each other's clothes and use each other's cold cream and whatever else needs to be done. Most of these characters live morally ambiguous lives. They do what they need to do, what they want to do, what gets them toward their goals. While none of them are villainous, they don't hesitate to go against societal norms in order to get what they're after. There's a feminism here that's not preachy or didactic. They just live. They just live the lives they want to live. They're not doing it for anybody. They're not talking about why they're living the way they live. They aren't outspoken about being women. They just do it. It's all about action. They aren't thinking about what words they say or getting on any platform. They're doing it. They're living without all the falderall. Muriel Spark also puts this book in a time of real change. So the war in Europe is officially over, and by the time the book ends, the war in Japan is over. So World War II has ended, but there is so much that has changed from before the war to after, and trying to negotiate everything that's happened. And so the changes in the economy, the changes in the various roles that people in society can play. I think there are a lot of reasons why Muriel Spark's books, and especially the Girls of Slender Means, are still relevant to us, even though it was published over 60 years ago. I think that there are some unstable times now. They are certainly different circumstances, but trying to navigate a time of significant change, changes in economics, changes in social status, changes in the roles of individuals and groups, and seeing how these women were working through that I think can be a real inspiration. And I think knowing how to be a little bit removed from the big media, the big culture, can help us do that navigation a little bit better. And there is some great action at the end of the story. I don't want to give that away. That's why the framing works so well, because you find out at the very beginning of the book that Nikki has died. You also find out, we've learned about him through the book as an anarchist, as a poet, as a novelist, as a free thinker, someone who is attracted to many different people, a very free spirit. And he ends up dying in Haiti as a Jesuit priest, a Jesuit missionary. We find that out on page 2 of the book. So a great plot, great characters, a fairly short read. It's novella sized. It's one of those books that I think you can sit down and read in 3 or 4 hours, a couple of sittings maybe. But there's so much packed in there, and there's so much that I'm still thinking about. And as you can tell, I don't always remember all the names of all the characters. But that's less important. The individual characters are important for who they are, and it's good to follow them, but that's not the memorable part of the book. So I think when you're looking for somebody who writes about really independence and freedom and personal agency, who writes about finding your way through very difficult societal circumstances. And if you see reasons to look out at the world today and think about satire and parody and how that plays into your own personal view of the world at large, Muriel Spark is the right author for that. So I would encourage you to find a Muriel Spark book. I think Girls of Slender Means, partly from the size of it and partly because of the impact that it has, I think that's a great place to start. I hope I've given you some reasons today to think about reading or rereading the novels of Muriel Spark. It doesn't seem like we talk about her much here on BookTube yet. Every time I have shown this book that I got or talked about the Folio Society edition of Prime of Miss Jean Brodie that I have, or any mention I have of Muriel Spark, I will get commenters who say, yeah, I read these books, or I've read this one and this one. I would like to go and read The Driver's Seat. I would like to go and read Loitering with Intent. It's amazing how people have read Muriel Spark, but still, I think, have kind of forgotten how much she can mean, and how much she can mean 60 years later in this world that we have today. So give it a try. If those sound like things that you want to read, things that you would enjoy, and if you just want some fantastic writing, some fantastic descriptions of people, it's worth it. Thank you so much for watching today. I'll be back soon with more reviews and book recommendations, of course, poetry. And until next time, my fellow readers, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.